I want to talk about double bubble maps. And in specific, I want to talk about when you're using double bubble maps, who's doing most of the work when you do them in class? Is it you? Is it the class? Or is it the individual students? Often I see that it is the class or the teacher themselves. It doesn't seem to be that double bubble maps are used often for individual students. So let's talk about how to change that and how to get the individual students to be doing the majority of the work and the majority of the thinking. So if you see here, here's two examples of double bubble maps that would really be insightful if we could get kids to make this on their own. But one of the things we have to think about when we do double bubble maps is not to give students all of the answers ahead of time, right? How do we ask students to truly organize and categorize their concepts and to compare and contrast in this manner? One of the ways we can do it is we can start with a blank double bubble map. That way, students aren't being told there's 3 right answers or there's 4 things to put, right? It allows them to have that deeper thinking and to think out what are the possibilities when they're comparing and contrasting 2 big ideas. So what is the purpose of a double bubble map? It's to compare and contrast 2 topics by identifying and sharing different concepts related to topics. That's huge. For me, a double bubble map is a very specific way to help our students compare and contrast, because sometimes our students, when they compare and contrast, get limited with what they're comparing and contrasting. But if we start with that blank document, that one I just showed right here, if we start with that one, sometimes our students don't know what to do. So one of the things I would suggest is creating student directions. Just a really brief explanation of how to fill out a double bubble map. Once your students have done it a couple of times, they won't need the directions. But what I find is if you don't have them, then the teacher runs around explaining to students how to fill out a double bubble map. So get ahead of that, put this on the board, put it on the back of the double bubble map template that you give them, and that'll go a long way to helping some of your students who aren't quite sure what they're supposed to be doing, right? So then that way you get these detailed bubble maps. One of the things you'll see is that on these examples, the arrows are labeled, and the arrows are labeled to force or to enhance students to understand the relationship between the 2 big concepts they're comparing and contrasting and what they're adding. Because often we assume as we grade them, or we assume as we look at them, that if a student wrote 2 long and 2 short sides, that they have some kind of or sense of it. But instead, I want them to understand that there's the relationship between the fact that rectangles have 2 long and 2 short sides. The same thing, right? If we're talking about making a drawing, we don't just have them draw it, we make sure they understand what they're doing. So some tips for students to write concepts, right? Giving them what they could put in those circles, and also tips to explaining those arrows, right? If we give them these tips, it goes a long way towards students being able to attack a double bubble map by themselves. In order to do that, let's think about the fact that planning for yourself is pretty minimal, right? You need to identify the learning intentions, identify the resources or notes that students will need to use, and you want to plan some mini deadlines so you're checking in on students. Also think about the fact that you want to resist the temptation to tell students how many circles to draw. The minute you tell them how many circles to draw, it almost becomes a fill in the blank rather than them personally comparing and contrasting. You also want to resist the temptation to overcomplicate the map by adding squares or some other shapes, right? Your students who have struggled traditionally with Venn diagrams or double bubble maps need this to be pretty simple for them to be able to concentrate on what matters, which is the comparing and contrasting. Some optional extensions you might think about is students getting peer feedback from each other on the map and then going back and enhancing their own, or using their double bubble map in order to write up a little writing about the comparing and contrasting. Also think about, there's some tips, right? So showing some examples, be specific, et cetera, et cetera. No matter how you're working with double bubble maps with your students, remember that the purpose is for them to compare and contrast, not you and not the class as a whole.